Hello, gentlemen. This is Scott, and what you're about to hear is an absolutely essential conversation with a world expert on anger management. I have to tell you, this wasn't recorded all that long ago, but even over the past couple weeks since Dr. Ron Potter-Efron and I threw down this particular episode, things have escalated in the realm of fear, anger, and even hate. And so I just wanted to acknowledge before we even get started today that, yeah, this is an episode that is absolutely coming at the right time for so many of us as men. And before we get rolling on it, I want to add a real quick point that isn't talked about in this particular episode. And yet it's something that we've talked about time and again on this show in the past, with other guests. And that's, gentlemen, as a masculine man, as a leader, as a guy who wants to be more attractive to women, you have an opportunity. You have a moment in time right now to be the voice for calm, for fun, for joy, for healing at a time, especially here in the United States of America, where the world could really use a few good men who know how to do that, who know how to be that man with the balls, with the courage to be that guy right now. Now, listen, I fully understand that probably flies in the face of everything you've been hearing on other men's groups. But listen, this is a show about rage. This is a show about anger. And now you have a brilliant, brilliant opportunity to show how mature and evolved of a masculine man you really are, especially for the women in your life. And indeed, for your family and for your kids, if you're a husband and a dad. Dr. Ron Potter-Efron is one hell of a guy. I was very fortunate to get him on the show. Enjoy this episode, guys. It's a good one. Here we go.
Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen. Welcome again to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on both Twitter and Parler. Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube. The website, as always, which I invite you to visit, is mountaintoppodcast.com. And if you have not joined the Facebook group that is appropriately enough called the Mountaintop Summit, I invite you to join that also on Facebook. All right, guys, listen up. Today we're going to talk about a topic that's incredibly important, and I can't believe we haven't talked about more on this show. As a matter of fact, I'm a little ashamed of it. But to that end, I went and researched who exactly was the right hombre to get on this show to talk to you guys about it, and I couldn't be more thrilled and delighted to introduce you to none other than Ron Potter-Efron, who is, in my estimation, the world's foremost expert on anger management. And today we're going to talk about why we as men erupt into anger, not just sometimes, but, almost systemically for a lot of guys. So without anything further, Ron, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Yes, man. Glad you're here. There's a lot to talk about. You are the author of multiple books on this subject. They include Healing the Angry Brain, Angry All the Time, which is your newest book, and one with the rather descriptive title Rage, and that is your bestseller. I'm interested to know how you decided or arrived at, as it were, this idea of focusing on, such a volatile area of subject matter expertise.
Well, I mostly accidental, as most of our life choices sort of happen to us rather than are chosen or self-chosen. I'm a counselor, mental health counselor, and as a male in a primarily female field, I got sent all the angry men, and I decided that would be a good area to start researching in and try to help my angry clients. And of course, then I looked at my own anger and found plenty of it that I needed to deal with as well.
So you're kind of implying there that the number one reason a man would visit a counselor and say, hey, you know what, I need some therapy here, is because they're angry. Is that correct?
I don't have a statistical proof of that, but I would say that is certainly one of the most likely reasons, and one of the things that differentiates them from women is that women are coming in because they're depressed, they're anxious, they're lonely. More men are coming in voluntarily, or I might say involuntarily, because of anger and even aggression problems. When I'm dealing with anger, my working belief is that there's always a gun at your back. Somebody is really upset with your behavior, including yourself. And there's reason when a man comes in for counseling, he wants to change something. He doesn't just want to be heard. He wants to actually make changes in his behavior.
Yeah, it seems to me most guys who find themselves being angry would certainly rather not be angry. They're wondering what the hell happened to them to get them to this point, right?
Well, at the moment you're angry, you always feel justified in it.
In the moment.
In the moment. But it can become a chronic condition where anger is you might say, your emotion of choice. That where somebody else might be pleasantly surprised or anxious or sad, you get angry. For instance, I've had people being thrown out of the literally thrown out of the hospital because they were so angry when their father had died, because they weren't able to express grief. They weren't able to express sadness. The only emotion that they were comfortable with or even knew how to express was anger. Anger alone is okay. I mean, occasional expressions of anger, everybody gets angry occasionally. But when it becomes a chronic condition, when people are angry all the time, that was the name of my first book, that becomes an issue.
So men are dealing with anger on the whole, by and large, whatever the heck that means, more than women are in a systemic way.
No, that's not true.
Not true.
No, the research indicates that men and women are angry about the same amount. Women, the only real difference, believe it or not, is women tend to cry more when they're angry, and men probably shout more. When you get into physical aggression, again, the surprise is that women initiate aggressive acts, physical violence, as much as men. The only real distinction becomes when you get to the most severe kinds of aggression and violence, because men are bigger and stronger, they can inflict more damage.
So do men and women get angry over the same things, though?
Well, now that's a really good question. I cannot answer that question authoritatively, so I think I better let it go right now. I suppose men get angry over football games more than women.
Oh, that's probably for sure.
The content might be different, but the deeper reasons, feeling rejected, feeling unheard, feeling abused, I think mostly those are similar emotions that undergird the feeling of anger.
Yeah. You mentioned the concept of men being the victims in domestic abuse situations or, any kind of assault situations at the hands of women. And that kind of harks to what else I was going to mention, which is how men tend to bottle things up. They don't want to express emotions. Somehow that's not manly. And what happens is you have these issues feeding anger if you're a man. And over time, finally, they've been bottled up. It's like shaking a warm Diet Coke. Once that thing's uncorked, the guy just snaps. Meanwhile, women, may feel a little bit more free to express those emotions over time, but those emotions may not be less intense than what the guy's been bottled up. And that in turn means that women can start throwing plates Godfather style at the guy, or take out a gun and cap him, or try to stab him with a kitchen knife. And, men can get hurt, and men can be very much threatened in a domestic situation. I remember even when I was married to my first wife, there were nights I feared going to sleep because I may not wake up. She may slit my throat, in the middle of the night. So, a lot of times guys can't even admit this is happening, right? Let alone do something about it.
Yeah, there is increasing evidence that women can be physically violent and aggressive, especially if they have weapons at hand. But many states now do have programs for domestic offense for women as well as for men. And there's an increasing recognition that violence is not just single-gendered. But in terms of the right to be emotional, I think you're right, Scott, that men have not been given as much of a right to be emotional as women, but with one exception, and that is anger. That men have much more permission to be angry in our society than women are. I mean, if you ask, can you be both an angry man and a good man? Most people would say, sure. If you ask, can you be both an angry woman and a good woman? Most people would say no.
Culturally, it seems like, at least here in the Western world, people take great offense when someone describes another woman as angry. Almost it's a personal affront to any woman. How dare you call her angry?
It's not seen as normal. Even in the national politics and stuff, women politicians are not supposed to ever look angry. They're not supposed to even be outraged or indignant the way it's perfectly okay for men to be.
Yeah, there's a double standard there for sure.
It leaves men with the situation where the only emotion that's really accepted for a lot of men is to be angry, no matter what what other emotions might be relevant. They're the ones that get suppressed.
Wow, that's really an interesting thought. And you mentioned before a couple of the ways that anger gets fed. And you mentioned several that piqued my interest immediately. One of them was having been abused earlier in life, or even in the moment, even in the current situation, being abused and feeling helpless perhaps, or unable to get out from under that situation that they're in. Maybe they feel like they're being oppressed either by society or by their boss or by some unhidden force that's keeping them from living the life they want to live or reaching the ambitions that they have deep within their heart. You also mentioned when men feel unheard or misunderstood, that can cause anger to start erupting within them. I think all of that's very, very fascinating. I'd love for you to expound on those reasons and maybe also offer some other ways that anger gets fed. What's feeding all these angry guys, Ron?
Well, there's no single cause of anger. What you've mentioned all are relevant. Increasingly, we're aware of how terrible trauma, early childhood trauma, affects people and affects them for the rest of their lives and can lead to anger problems. I think the center of what you were talking about, Scott, is a sense of impotence or weakness. And men we're supposed to be dominant. We're supposed to be strong. And one of the major sources of anger and even rage is that we are in situations where we feel dominated by somebody else. Unheard would be part of it. Unheard in the sense of you're not important enough to listen to. And so I call that an impotent rage response, and it can just blast out of somebody. Maybe, like you said, been building up and building up and building up. And finally the person says, how dare you treat me like that? Who do you think I am, a child? And off they go, yelling and screaming and acting like a child.
And men indeed have an inherent primal archetypal need to have some authority, have some power. And yet that striving within men to lead, to be in a position of power, to have some dominance is often branded toxic by today's society. And men just don't know what to do with that. Defer to someone else. If a woman wants to lead you, defer to her, be a demure, softer person. And a lot of guys, they'll give that a try and realize it just doesn't match up with their personal chemistry of who they are as a man. And then it gets bottled up and gets bottled up, and then it explodes. And then that's when the truly toxic things happen, right?
I think the antidote to either I'm strong or I'm weak is I'm equal. And to seek a relationship with another person, be it man or woman, be it intimate or in work, in which you don't have to dominate or be subservient, but actually be partner with the other person.
I'm reminded of a very popular movie from the 80s that perhaps a lot of these young guys haven't even ever watched the original version of, even though the show Cobra Kai is very popular nowadays. And that's The Karate Kid. And the difference between the Cobra Kai douchebags who want to just have no mercy and make people suffer and laugh at other people's pain, and their douchebag sensei is so dramatically in opposition to the calm, mature, calculated demeanor of a Mr. Miyagi, who is very reserved and holds the need to be violent for only the most necessary situations, and teaches patience and teaches perseverance. And at the end of the movie, of course, that prevails, and that's the heroism of the movie. And I think that's so ingrained within men. How great would it be just to, demolish these douchebags with their own violence, kind of like Aikido style, if not karate, right? And that seems like the more mature, evolved way to be. And yet, sometimes we see the douchebags win in life, and that can cause us to become angry again, can it?
Yeah. Life is not fair.
Certainly not.
If there's one statement that I would say is the most common one that my clients ever give me is life's not fair. It's not fair. It's just not fair. Whether or not that meant being arrested when your partner was just as aggressive as you, but she wasn't arrested, or in a job situation, somebody else got promotion, or in almost any situation. It's not fair. It rings out over and over again. And it speaks to sort of the ethical component of anger, the sense of outrage that my values have been violated. It's not just my person has been violated, but my values have been violated as well. And that's something that is seldom discussed even in anger management groups. But until we find out what the person's main values are that have been violated, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to help that person change their behavior.
Now, hold on a second. This is a valid subject to tackle here. That all-important concept of righteous indignation versus immature, flying off the handle, being an angry guy. On Twitter, on Facebook, certainly in the news, we're seeing how people more than ever before are rallying around various social causes, either on the right or the left politically, and they're very angry about it. And everybody who sides with them are counting these people who are standing up and carrying the torches and pitchforks, as it were, either literally or figuratively, as heroes, because the anger is warranted. Meanwhile, we are in the middle of a pandemic here that has caused people to feel, well, in many ways, Ron, less personally powerful than ever before. We're bottled up literally. Well, not literally, but, we're holed up literally within our own homes. We're told to wear a mask. A lot of people feel like the government has too much control over us nowadays. A lot of people feel like certain ethnic groups, genders are being marginalized more than ever. And it's all adding up to a lot of fear and therefore a lot of anger. And sometimes it's hard to tell who's just being hateful versus who has righteous indignation going on. How do you really tell the difference? Not only externally, Ron, but internally. How do we check ourselves as well as deciding which cause to go to battle with? I mean, are we really battling with the Miyagis of the world or the Cobra Kais? There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer all of what you're bringing up here. That the sense of outrage is very critical to understand. And when you get Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, and you realize that both sides are, as you say, righteously indignant and more, then you have to, any sense of empathy and any sense of understanding that the other person also has values and is fighting for something that's very important for them tends to get lost. And the antidote is empathy. Believe it or not, if I could cite somebody like Martin Luther King, who never lost his empathy, even for his, in quotes, enemies, as against what we're seeing now, where people just are full of hate toward another person. The thing about hatred is moral outrage says there's something that's, there's been a moral injury here that we must correct. When you get into hate, there you add disgust. You add the element of, not only has there been a moral injury, but I'm disgusted with the person who did it. And once you get into the area of disgust, you're dehumanizing the other person. They're less than human, and therefore you have the right to do anything you want to them. So that's why empathy is so important, because when you have empathy toward another person, you won't be filled with disgust toward them. That applies to dating relationships and everything else too. The moment you have a disgust reaction, you better take a time out. You got to get away until you can let go of that feeling of disgust.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. We definitely want to talk at length about relationships with women here. But importantly, you just drew a parallel between anger and hate that I think has got to be explored.
Okay.
On social media, people are looking for reasons to hate, and they hate freely. And you see the same accounts over and over just spewing hate. And it's not just anger. It's deeper. I mean, there's outrage, and then I'm just somehow getting this prurient joy from just tearing into someone else. And every time I see a post like that, Ron, I'm thinking that person has their own issues to deal with. I think it's a bit of a scapegoat to say to someone who's angry or has some bit of righteous outrage that, hey, you got your own issues to work out. This is your own lack of self-esteem talking. This is your own pain being projected upon someone else. I mean, maybe, maybe not. But one thing I found about hate, and I would love to have your opinion on this as a world expert. You might shoot it down. You may agree partially or wholly with it, but here it is. I have really done a lot of soul searching and a lot of researching. And I found myself really in agreement with those who claim there really are only two human emotions, love and fear. And a lot of times people will say, hate is the opposite of love. But I really think hate is a symptom of fear. So when you're talking about something like systemic racism, for example, here's someone who isn't like me, therefore I don't understand them. And because I don't understand them, I fear them. And because I fear them, I grow to hate them. And then that's when I lash out. That's when I get defensive. That's when my fear feels like it has to have an outlet in terms of somehow stopping those people or keeping them away from me, et cetera, et cetera. And it's ugly. And I found also that because hate descends from fear, hate is not courageous. Now, you can face fears with courage, but hate really does tend to wimp out. So when you have people who are inherently wimpy, they're rarely going to be the ones who express that righteous indignation towards something that they feel needs to be stopped. Because when someone sees a cause that they believe in, that anger does not supersede, that feeling, as it were, does not supersede the actual cause. But I think people out there on Twitter in particular, Ron, are just looking for reasons to be hateful because they're hateful people. And my feeling is that it happens because hate flows through the path of least resistance. And here's what I mean by that. Because people who are genuinely hateful are probably genuinely fearful, they will gravitate towards hating that which society tells them is okay to hate, right? A lot of guys listening to this show feel that as a man, we're convenient to hate. It's societally allowed to hate on men nowadays. If you're a heterosexual man, then it's the patriarchy. If you're a white heterosexual man, then basically you're the scourge of the universe. And my feeling, and this is going to sound extremely bombastic to a lot of people, but here it is that if you take someone who is inherently hateful and deposit them into a different milieu, a different time, a different era, a different societal condition, they would just as freely hate the people who were convenient to hate, who they were allowed to hate in that era, in that place and time, as they are nowadays hating whoever it is that's in front of them who's convenient to hate. And on top of that, the further up the food chain the person, the hater, is directing their vitriol towards, the safer it is. If you want to hate someone who's never going to knock on your door and kick your ass, let alone challenge you at all, hate all the way up the food chain to the president of the United States because they're never going to respond to you. What's your feeling about that? Do you agree that there's this link between hate and fear? And do you see it similarly to how I do, or do you see a different twist on it?
Well, neurologically, the core warning system we have says if somebody knocks on the door, for instance, is there a danger or isn't there danger? The first issue is always survival. So to that extent, that fear represents a threat to your survival, yeah, it's a core issue. It's dominant. I do try to tell there's a myth in our society that says that anger is just called a cover emotion, which means that it really just hides sadness or fear or hurt, or people have all different kinds of names for it. And I tried to tell people, no, that anger is very deeply rooted also in our neurology as an attempt to survive, as part of our survival system. So we would have a hard time surviving without anger. So partly I agree with you that there's a core issue of fear. Partly I want to keep anger separate, and both neurologically separate and also clinically separate, so that we don't always end up saying, well, we really have to deal with your fearful issues. Also, I think that the greatest hate that we have is reserved toward our most intimate people. So I can hate my wife potentially much more than I can hate, say, Biden or Trump, depending on your perspective. But I will say one thing, which I think is really important, that the more angry we get, the more we're training ourselves to be angry. So every time we turn on a video of somebody being hateful, every time we allow ourselves to feel anger or hate, we're actually training ourselves to become more angry and more hateful. And the only way to get away from that is to not let ourselves get involved with all those resources, and instead pull away from them and find some things that bring us peace instead of anger and hate.
You know, I'm reminded as you were talking, Ron, about how we tend to adopt the societal personality of the group we associate most with. And I think a lot of angry guys, especially guys who are frustrated with women in particular, gravitate towards groups of men who will feed that anger and validate it and allow them to kind of feel into it. And, you know, that cheap anger, that validation of a feeling you don't even really like having, and that perhaps deep down or even on the surface you wish were different, is a lot like eating a lot of junk food and not expecting to get fat and unhealthy.
Anger doesn't have, our emotions don't have names. We have to supply content to say what I might be angry, but then I look around for what am I angry at? Often the emotion precedes the content. And if I'm with a group of people who can tell me what the content is, and that is maybe hate Jews, for instance, I happen to be Jewish, or to hate some other group of people, well, yeah, it's a lot easier to say, okay, that's what I'm angry about. We often take the anger emotion and then we label it, and we say it's about hating Jews or hating Catholics or hating Republicans or whatever it is. The anger could have gone anywhere. You find people trolling around looking for that. They're so angry inside, and they're looking for some place that they can direct their anger that seems right to them. But it's never going to make them feel right inside, because they're not dealing with what they need to deal with, which is what caused a terrible, terrible sense of anger inside them.
Now, see, that's along the lines with what I was saying before. Whereas people who are genuinely hateful people, you know, and you can call that a character flaw, or you could say, on the other hand, they've gotten to this point where they're just angry. And like you said, they can't even wrap their head around it. They're just angry. Those people are indeed looking for something to hate, and they're going to hate through the path of least resistance because they don't want to pay consequences for that, because that's within human nature, right?
Okay. So they're looking for something that they can hate. Well, not 100% agree with you in terms of path of least consequences, because sometimes people will die in the name of their hatreds.
Not always. I mean, yeah,
not always. Sure. But what you're saying is it's easy to hate from a distance.
Yeah, there's a lot of wimpy haters on Twitter. Let's face it.
Well, I agree with that, and so much of that is putting on a show that I can hate better than anybody else. I can really show you how to really be angry. And I often wonder, well, after the person has ranted and raved on TV or so forth, or on Twitter or whatever for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and they get off, what are they really like? Are they really that angry all
what
the
have
time?
They accomplished?
Yeah.
Other than just being pissed off and venting. Yeah, you know, people will find their echo chamber. They'll find people who validate their hate. or their anger, or perhaps both at the same time. And they'll somehow fool each other into thinking, hey, we're the healthy ones. We're the ones who are correct. We're the ones who are right about this. And I'm thinking, and I'm talking to you guys out there who are perhaps getting sucked into hashtag MGTOW, men going their own way, guys who are incels, guys who are just angry at women. Guys, you're never going to attract women. You're never going to correct your problems with women by being angry at women and hating them, because women will follow your lead. That's the masculine feminine dance at work there. And if you don't like them and you're angry at them, not only will they not like you back, they'll be angry at you too. And kind of on that note, Ron, you mentioned before how in relationships we can get angry and start hating the woman we perhaps love the most. And we brought up in a recent show, matter of fact, just a couple weeks ago with my wife on, how people definitely tend to behave the worst towards the people they say they love the most because we feel comfortable. And a lot of times that comfort gets manifested in my angry, negative feelings that I may perhaps try to cover up, sweep under the carpet, and put on a pretty face for, when I'm around people I don't know so well and am so comfortable with. The example I give of the latter is the guy in the auto parts store who's just an angry dude deep down because of whatever stuff's happened in his life, but he's trying really hard not to be an asshole. It's just really hard for him, even though he's on the job. And it's just such a tangled web, isn't it? How would a guy get in touch with his anger? And I know that sounds so feminine, but how does a guy get in touch with his feelings here and really diagnose, is this a systemic hate-filled anger, or am I just angry at something for all the right reasons? Is it out of control? Is it under control? How can we be introspective in that regard, Ron?
The best thing that we need to look at, I think, is basically what are my goals here? What do I want in my life? And am I getting it? Or not? Is this anger really helping me get what I want? Sometimes it is. I mean, anger, there's always room for advocacy. There's room for using anger well. But a lot of times when we ask ourselves the question, is this working or not? The answer is no. My life is worse because of all this anger that I'm spewing out, not better. Well, if you ask that question and then you answer it with no, my life is worse because of my anger, then you have a personal responsibility and an invitation, you might say, to change and to explore other emotions other than anger, to look at maybe why you're so angry in the first place as well. There's a paradox in what you were talking about, Scott. Yes, the angry person who had to stuff all that anger at work does come home and can get angry in a safer place, namely, with his wife and kids. Yeah, that is true. But it's also true that it's his wife and kids who can hurt him the most. And ultimately, his greatest anger may be directed at them. So your home is both the safest place you can be angry and the most dangerous place you can be angry.
Well, I think those are all points very well taken. It also brings up what I consider to be the very immature but very real concept of what I call extreme emotion toggling. And this, of course, gets right to the heart of relationship anger. Back in high school, you may fall in love with your girlfriend and love her so much and be obsessed with her and hang pictures of her everywhere. And your buddies are just telling you to shut up because they hear about this girl all the time. Then she either dumps you and or cheats on you and you hate her. Despise her with that disgust you were talking about just as much as you loved her 10 minutes ago, because it's the extreme emotion that just gets toggled in a different direction. And I think that sort of piggybacks a little bit on top of what you were saying about how extreme emotion is just looking for a venue sometimes.
We haven't used the word shame yet.
Oh yeah. Shame and guilt, man. Wow.
I think we should add it in here. One of the great vulnerabilities that we have and leads to what I call shame-based rage is when we are attacked sometimes suddenly without warning, and we are basically attacked at the level of self, that we are weak, we're worthless, I wish you had never been born, kind of a situation a mom might say to her son. And it's when we feel that, especially that sudden unexpected burst of shame, that you can end up just fighting that with just extreme anger, extreme rage, and retaliate by trying to shame the person who shamed you, or it turned into physical violence against that person. If you're talking about the worst kinds of anger, you better look at shame.
Yeah. I mean, we have talked about shame and guilt, the difference between the two and the relationship between the two at length on this show. And I think it's extremely wise to tie that to this conversation because it has a lot to do with it. Because, you feel like others are disrespecting you. Others are denigrating you. They're taking your power away. And that frustration comes from that. And you may want to make it right and just feel like there's no way to correct this guilt you feel and the shame you feel because of it. Yeah, absolutely. That creates a lot of angry guys, for real. We're drawing to a close here. There are a couple things I think we would be remiss if we didn't cover. The first of which is, of course, COVID-related anger. And, of course, men and women can feel this. But here are a couple things I've noticed. The more frustration men feel, the more they're likely to lash out in anger. And frustration is the feeling caused by not getting what you want. And you've already cited that as a primo cause for anger in men, specifically. And definitely for women too, of course. I mean, we're all human here. And being locked up, losing our job, going broke, feeling disrespected because of our race or our gender or how we represent ourselves, all of those things have bubbled up to the surface here. And that in combination with a lot of people feeling like the government has too much control, that I'm being told what to do, has resulted in a lot of guys with a lot of negative emotion bottled up that they really don't know what to do with. And I'll tell you something. I'm a huge rock and roll fan. And something I found out years ago is if you look at the Arbitron ratings, which is how they judge how well radio stations are doing in a particular metro area, metropolitan service area, as they would call it, MSA. You may have seen that acronym before. The album-oriented rock stations, ones who play the AC/DCs and the Offspring and the Guns N' Roses and all the real heavy metal stuff, a lot of that music is very angry music. Okay. That's where all the anger and the, I can't stand you and screw this and screw that music is going to be found. And the demo is like 90% male for those radio stations. It's just crazy. And, I'll be the first to admit I love this music and I listen to it when I'm in the garage tinkering on stuff. And what's really interesting is the song I keep hearing more and more and more and more, almost like they've put it into rotation every couple dozen songs on my local rock station, is Killing in the Name of by Rage Against the Machine, which, the refrain at the end, they bleep out. They give the radio version, but it's just the guy screaming at the top of his lungs, F you, I won't do what you told me. Right? And they play this song over and over because it's got to be performing really well. There's got to be a lot of requests because guys just really need this song to go get their rocks off on. What is it about us in rock and roll, especially in the time of COVID? And is that healthy to express our anger in the garage over Rage Against the Machine, appropriately enough named a band as it is? Or, are there other healthy ways to kind of dissipate this stuff?
Right.
Get out of the racquetball court or go play some, pick up football or whatever. What is it?
Well, Scott, I think I'll go back to what you said about fear, that for so many men, they're really scared right now. They can't support their families. They're stuck at home, like you said, in a situation where they're not really used to being. Given that anger is an acceptable emotion for men, but being afraid is not, it comes out in bursts of anger and rage. And the more helpless the person feels, the more overwhelmed by an unfriendly society, the more likely it is to come out that way. And sadly, the ongoing research shows that the number of domestic violence episodes is going up pretty fast in this era of COVID. You can't, maybe you guys can't go out to the bar and drink anymore, but they're sure drinking plenty, and they're drinking at home where they're more dangerous than they used to be. So I think one thing that would be really helpful for men when they're feeling this really simmering rage and stuff is to ask themselves, what am I scared of? What's the worst case scenarios here? How realistic are they? And then maybe actually have to talk with somebody such as your spouse or girlfriend or whatever about your fear, and maybe even allow yourself to be comforted and taken care of instead of having to be the hero all the time. Because when you have to be a hero and life is going absolutely wrong, it's a setup for you to end up being super angry.
Isn't that fascinating? That idea of feminine energy kind of healing, soothing the savage beast in us, and even possibly recharging our masculinity to, get back out there and be a real hero instead of feeling badly about ourselves or getting flat out angry about it. What a beautiful testament to the masculine feminine dance, right? And at the same time, men have this love-hate relationship with being angry and dealing with anger. And it's almost like when you can overcome adversarial anger with whatever emotion or whatever mechanism you throw at it, it eases one's own frustration as a man and makes us feel victorious and powerful again. I don't talk about it much on this show, but I did used to work with kids in gangs earlier in my career. And I got firsthand knowledge of many of the ways they were indoctrinated and trained to be gang members. And some of it's just flat out genius, Ron. Like if a gang member inspires the ire of someone who's in an opposing gang or even some normal guy, and there may be potential violence afoot, if there's more than one gang member, what they'll do is they'll just look at each other, start laughing, and point at the guy who's angry. Like, you're just ridiculous, and that makes the guy more angry. And then the guy is kind of hamstrung by that. He doesn't know what to do. Why are you guys responding to my anger not by getting all riled up like I wanted you to? Why are you just laughing it off? And then why are you pointing at me as if I'm the one who's ridiculous? And the other thing, which was even far more common, was when someone got angry with the gang members, they would look at him with this certain pathos in their face and go, "Oh, why are you scared, bro? What are you scared of?" And it would diffuse them. It would either diffuse them or make them fly off the handle with such renewed rage that they could be easily subdued because they were just going nuts. That's no way to fight. And I always found that extremely fascinating, is they would take anger and call it fear because that's so emasculating. And I never forgot that. I never forgot those tactics they would use because they were just so genius in those situations. And it really caused the guys who were in the gang to exert amazing social control in the moment over just about anyone because they'd been trained to be a chess move ahead of everybody. Fascinating, isn't it?
Wow. I haven't had that experience. I remember one gang member I worked with who, a high school gang member, and he came asking one question, which is, how can I turn down fights? Yeah, he was the toughest guy in the school. People would try to challenge him, and he just wanted to get out of that relationship, out of that role, and he didn't know how to do it. And you can really get trapped in your reputation. You can get trapped in your role. The last thing anybody needs to be is the angry guy in the business, in the relationship, because once you're tagged that way, you might be doing a lot of non-angry stuff and people will still think that you're angry.
Yeah. You mad, bro? That's another one. When someone's just slightly angry, these gang guys could turn them around just like on a pivot by calling it out. "Oh, you mad, bro?" And the guy goes, "I'm not mad." And then they would be their own walking, talking dichotomy, even as they're mad while trying to pretend they're not mad. And the social power of it was just immense. It's all very fascinating. I mean, the gang guys, once they're indoctrinated, once they're in, it is harder to get out than you might think. Yeah. There are consequences socially. Yeah. Before we talk about your book, Ron, I know that you have another cause that's very near and dear to your heart, and that's Lewy body dementia. And your dear wife of many years is suffering from that, unfortunately. Tell these guys how they can be a little bit more aware of that and what we can do if we want to make a difference in that regard.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to let me have a little voice on that. Lewy body dementia is the second most common form of dementia after Alzheimer's, but amazingly few people, even very educated people, know what it is. I would invite people to check out our blog, which is called Lewy Body Dialogue. Just go www.lewybodydialogue.com. And you'll see it's called a dialogue because we have episodes such as sensitivity to noise, and I'll write what I see from my perspective, and Pat will write what she can write from her perspective, and we talk about it. If you want to be educated in terms of what Lewy body is and how it affects people, try our blog.
Isn't that something, how there can be multiple types of certain disorders or dysfunctions, and only the most common is the one that gets the most attention from the media? Yeah, so definitely, I think that's a good cause. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Guys, his name is Dr. Ron Potter-Efron. And if you'd like to learn more about him, what I've done is I've set up a special URL where you can get his book called Rage. And that is at mountaintoppodcast.com/rage, RAGE. And since he is so prolific in his work in this area of subject matter expertise, gentlemen, I've also put all three of the books we have mentioned in this show at the top of the queue on my Amazon influencer page. And those are Healing the Angry Brain, Angry All the Time, and the aforementioned Rage. All those books are there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. I highly recommend all three. You've clearly seen how Dr. Potter-Efron is truly a world-class, well-traveled, and extremely smart expert on this topic, and many other ideas also coming from him that are equally worthy. So get you some, guys. Get all three of those books and read up on this. And most of all, know how to check yourself if you're that angry young guy or that angry, cranky old guy. A lot of this is testosterone related. We haven't even talked about that. We've had other guests on the show to talk about that. Jed Diamond comes to mind, so you may want to check out the episodes from him specifically related to hormonal imbalances that cause us to be more angry and irritable. Meanwhile, Dr. Ron Potter-Efron, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an essential conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, sir. And gentlemen, definitely go over to mountaintoppodcast.com and get on the phone with me for 25 minutes to talk about how 2021 is going to be different for you. 2020 is in the rearview mirror. Yes, we still have a COVID crisis going on, but the world is going to open up. You're going to need to be ready. What is your new normal going to look like? This is what I call 2021 foresight, and all of that is open for discussion when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com and click on the red button in the upper right-hand corner and talk to me for free for 25 minutes. I'm exactly who you think I'm going to be. I'm a normal guy just like you. Let's get on the phone. Let's talk. Also, while you're there, check out the good folks at Origin in Maine. We had Pete Roberts on this show. Those guys are cooking up a lot of cool stuff for you guys in the year 2021. Make sure your body is working at peak performance. Get a pair of the factory jeans from Origin, which are the absolute best jeans I've ever worn, and see what else is there for you when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/origin. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.